fisheries as one of the major stumbling blocks in the Brexit negotiations. So why is that? What's the core of the issue?
So there are different layers. So that the first question is the long-standing access of European fishing boats, fishing fleets, into UK waters. And ever since the UK joined the EEC in 1976, it essentially gave over its sovereignty over its what's called exclusive economic zone. And so the EU, under the common fisheries policy, pulls together all of the fishing interests, all of the fish, essentially, across all of the European Union. Okay, so to then, after this long history of generations of Danish and French and Dutch and Spanish and Irish fishing interests using fish in British waters, to just stop that from happening is a big political hit to those continental European fishing interests, and of course Ireland as well. So that's a big one. That's a big political question. In addition to that, and this is where it gets into the trade policy, is the EU has always had a very protectionist policy over its domestic fishing interests. So it tried the European Union, especially France and Spain historically, but increasingly Poland and others, they have quite big fish processing kind of industries. And so they protect those industries with tariffs. And those tariffs would mean that the UK would not be able to access the European market at the normal competitive price. At the moment, it pays nothing because it's part of the customs union. So the core issue is that the European Union, the Commission, in its negotiation tactics, is trying to tie together this long-standing access to the resource to UK fishing interests, like processing interests, their access to the EU market. So it's linking the two things. But the British, they don't want there to be a link. They think that the tariff negotiations should be separate from the fish access to the fishing boats activities. So that's the main issue there. And so politically, this is important because in the European Commission, fish punches above its its economic weight. Sorry, so fish punches above its economic weight because it's so politically important, especially to Spain, but also France and other countries. So even before Brexit, fish and fisheries trade are kind of a hot topic in EU trade negotiations. So it was always going to be a stumbling block.
I think that the sector represents only the 0.1% in the UK. So yeah. Why to the UK is that important?
So that well, first of all, it's still 24,000 people. Now that's small in the UK context compared to, for example, automobiles, which they might be sacrificing, which is, I think, what you're getting at. But it's 24,000 people in vulnerable areas. So they're in regions of the UK that voted for Brexit, and they're in regions of the UK that the Conservative government wants to keep on side.
Yes, that's what was my suspect, yes.
Yes, and so again, it's the economic weight of fisheries in the UK is punching above the political weight. I got it the wrong way around again. The political weight of fisheries in the UK is punching above massively its economic weight, which is what's implied in your question. And so the other thing to think about, though, is that even though it makes up only 0.1% of the UK economy, that's just the fishing aspect. There's also all of the onshore stuff. So, for example, when the boats come into port, the economic activity that's created there, and then the fish processing and the exports. So it's the number of 0.1% doesn't necessarily properly reflect the broader contribution that fisheries has to the British economy. So, for example, finance has a massive contribution to the British economy, but in monetary value terms. But in terms, if you start looking at the job creation, if you start looking at the kind of more real economy effects of finance, it's not as big as the numbers make it look. So the numbers are always quite confusing when it comes to fishing, because it's often quite a hidden industry, and that's the case around the world. But the main reason for the blockage is, from the UK side, the nationalism of taking back control, and on the EU side, the nationalism of the Spanish and the French around it's our fish, etc. So it's like an inevitable clash.
I understand. And one quick question: once Britain's left the EU, which law will regulate its access to stocks and exclusive economic zone?
That's the law, international, the United Nations Law of the Sea. So since 1982, it's called UNCLOS, or the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It has basically gave to all coastal countries and island countries what's called sovereign rights for all of the marine resources in its sea from 200 nautical miles from its coastline. So all of the fish or seabed resources, any kind of marine resource, belongs to that country, right? But it's not the same as normal sovereignty. It's sovereign rights. It simply means that no one else can extract those resources without paying, essentially, or agreeing with the coastal state to do so. So the UK will end up selling, it wants to end up selling its access rights, for example, to the French and the Danish and the Dutch. And it wants to do that on an annual basis. So it will engage in what's called an access agreement negotiation, and it will charge a certain amount per year or a certain amount per volume of fish for those boats to access those waters, using its sovereign rights.
And once the law has changed and we exit European Union, which law is going to enter into place? So which law will be replacing the existing one?
Yeah. Well, the UK...
Do you not find an agreement?
The UK's developed a new Fisheries Act, so it will be the UK domestic law or domestic law and regulations that will take over. The problem will be where there is a straddling stock or a shared stock. So, for example, cod that moves between the waters of the UK's exclusive economic zone and the EU's waters under the common fisheries policy. So they'll have to enter into some kind of new institutional setup where they govern that, cooperatively. But I mean, in principle, that won't be a problem. That kind of happens already with the EU and Norway, for example. And it happens. I work for the Pacific Islands part-time, and their exclusive economic zones. The fish, the tuna, flows through all their different exclusive economic zones, and they just cooperate. They have a kind of regional fisheries management body. So either the law will be governed by the UK Fisheries Act, or it will have to be mutually governed by the UK and the EU, and maybe Norway as well, depending upon where the fish is.
But just a quick question. In that case, this agreement would be like temporary, like to be renewed each year, for instance. So not a long-term one.
Well, there is a risk that it would be temporary, but the proper fisheries management should be more kind of medium term in planning. But who knows? The UK has some experience because it also has lots of overseas countries and territories like the French. And so they have quite a lot of understanding of this kind of situation. And so I think that they'll be okay at that. The question is who's going to really benefit from this? You know, so at the moment, the quota in the UK system that goes to British interests or Scottish tends to really benefit the big business, and the small scale fishers, who are the ones who politically have been saying let's take back control, actually probably won't benefit. So it's going to be big business that will benefit the most from this, I think, rather than the small scale.
Do that will benefit you?
No, on the British side. So if the British manage to negotiate control over their exclusive economic zone, then when they allocate the fish that's in those waters to their domestic fishing interests, then I think probably what they'll do is end up giving more of that to big business than to the little fishers.
Which is the big business in the UK?
I don't know exactly. I don't work on the UK particularly. It's the big industrial boats off the coast of the north of Scotland.
As the UK exports over 70% of its fish and to the EU, I meant, in case of no agreement, the EU will impose tariffs.
Yeah. So the thing to keep in mind here, so the UK exports most of the UK fish exports, as you say, go to the EU, and you know, for example, to France or to Spain, and the first thing to do is to think about the different species that get eaten. So, you know, the UK have said, okay, don't worry, we'll have a market in China or we'll have a market in Japan, but they don't always eat the same species that the Spanish eat or the French eat. So there's this kind of culture of consumption. And there is a big question, like you say, suggest, that around whether or not UK fishing interests, the businesses, will have markets outside of the UK. So that's one big question. Oh, sorry, outside of the EU. The second big question, even if they have access to the EU, there will probably be high tariffs. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the Europeans historically have protected their fishing interests with very high tariffs. In fact, if you look at the tariff structure, the EU tariff structure, one of the biggest areas where they have high tariffs is exactly on processed fish, right? And that's to protect the Spanish and the French. So that's one thing. So, but even if then the UK manages to negotiate a reduced tariff, right? So that kind of, you know, maybe not 20%, maybe 5% tax or whatever, they still have to meet rules of origin, which are a technical trade policy headache. They have to meet sanitary measures, and they'll have to comply with EU regulations on what's called illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, or IUU fishing. So there's massive bureaucracy that you have to go through to access the EU market. And I know this because I work with countries in Africa and countries in the Pacific who are always trying to export their fish to the EU. And even if they have duty-free access, which some of them do, they can't sell their fish there because they can't get past these other barriers or non-tariff barriers. And so the tariffs are important, but the non-tariff barriers are also very important. And the UK simply is not ready to deal with that.
I understand. Would that be possible if the UK won't export 70% of its fish to the EU to access other markets at that point? So where are we going to export to?
Yeah, good question. Who knows? I mean, the thing is that the EU and Japan are the two major markets in the world that all of the developing countries are trying to access. And the reason why is they're massive markets for fish products, and they are relatively rich consumers, right? Now, the UK could possibly export to the US. It could possibly export to China and others, but it would largely be very, very specialist, kind of quite micro markets. It wouldn't be the big kind of mass markets. And the other thing to think, of course, is that fish, deteriorate, right, really quickly. And so the geographical region, the geographical closeness really matters. And as soon as you start putting a fish on a plane and air freighting it, for example, to Japan, the costs go up exponentially. And so then you're competing against companies that that bought their own planes years ago to try and deal with this. And the British industry just doesn't have that level of sophistication in terms of the cold chain. And if you're not selling fresh or fresh chilled, then you're selling frozen. And if you're selling frozen, it's much cheaper. And so the cost structure of the UK, which of course is high because of relatively high salaries and regulation costs, means that it will probably not be competitive. So really, the UK is going to be at a loss for a significant percentage of its exports. One idea, of course, is that the UK consumer might start buying more of the fish and seafood that currently goes to France and Spain. But that would mean that the UK consumer has to change their culture of consumption. The UK consumer is very conservative. It's salmon, cod, tuna,
Yeah.
prawns. They're not very good at the kind of more complex or unusual products, which is very often what the British fisherman or fisher is catching. And I don't think that the UK consumer is going to buy all of the fish and seafood that is caught in the UK waters. So in the end, the UK fisher is going to have to find markets probably in the EU again, but then they'll be non-competitive if they're hit with a tariff. So it's really a trap.
Yes.
I think
That's a trap. And under this regard, apart from the matter of the market, what, in your view, Professor, hello?
Yeah, I'm here. I can hear you.
And what, in your view, would be a possible way out from this reader of laws and possible agreement?
Well, I think that what might happen is the UK will engage in a trade-off. So the EU will not allow the historical access rights of the Danish and the French and the Spanish to be lost. It won't allow that because it sets a precedent in international law. And the law of the sea actually gives, for example, the Danish, some legal right. So even though the UK will have sovereign rights over its exclusive economic zones, the law of the sea has this special kind of consideration of long-term access rights before the law of the sea. And the Danish have been fishing in British waters for hundreds of years. And so the Europeans will be very reluctant to do that. So I imagine what will happen is there will be some kind of a fudge. You know this word, fudge, like a mess where the European boats still have access to some species, and in return, UK fishers will have, if there's a free trade agreement, will have some liberalisation of tariffs into the EU market. I anticipate that, but who knows? I don't know. That would be one way around it, because the interests on both sides are very entrenched, and there really isn't sufficient understanding of each other's problems, I think.
The situation, just a simple question. But it is a question very common among people who are not familiar with this matter. So, what is the gain for the fishery industries, for the boats go out in high sea and fish, and Brexit itself? I mean, is that true that it is an advantage? Yes or no? So the situation is better now or will be better in the future for the British industry?
Oh, I think that different segments of the British industry will be better off, and other segments of the British industry will be worse off. I
Which
think that
ones?
I think the big business that's catching kind of commodity products that are sold in the UK, they will be fine. Whereas the small scale fishers who are exporting to the EU, they will go out of business.
I
And
see.
so I don't think there's such a thing as, you know, the UK fishing industry. I think that it's a fragmented world of business, like any business, you know, and so it's not coherent. It's very fragmented.
And what will be the major consequence if the UK chooses not to cooperate with neighboring coast states and close completely its exclusive zone and for foreign fish vessels? I mean, it will be a situation of conflict in your view. What is going to happen?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the Cod Wars of the 1970s? So where the British and the Iceland, you know, it was quite aggressive. I expect that there will be significant diplomatic incidents around fishing into the medium to long term, because if the Europeans and the British can't reach some kind of agreement on this, then, for example, French fishers will just go and fish anyway, and because you know they will claim long-term historic access rights, which they have, and the same as the Danish, in the same way that the British will claim, well, this is our sovereign right under the law of the sea. I mean, basically, it's quite an ambiguous legal area, and because of that ambiguity, there will be a basis for conflict.